there is a quiet pattern that most people overlook. It does not announce itself loudly, it does not demand attention, it does not arrive with confidence, recognition, or advantage. It begins in the background, the overlooked individual, the underestimated voice, the one who enters the room without shifting its energy. At first glance, nothing about them appears threatening, nothing about them suggests dominance, influence, or control. In many cases, they are dismissed early, labeled as inexperienced, unlikely, behind, and yet, over time, something begins to change, not externally at first, internally. Because when someone is placed in the position of the underdog, a very specific psychological environment is created, an environment that, if navigated correctly, can become one of the most powerful developmental conditions a human being can experience. But here is where most people misunderstand the underdog. They think it is about proving others wrong. It is not. They think it is about sudden success, dramatic transformation, or a moment of recognition. It is not. The psychology of the ultimate underdog is far more controlled than that, far more precise, far more disciplined. It is not driven by noise, it is built on quiet accumulation, because when a person is not expected to win, something unusual happens to their behavior. They are no longer performing for approval. They are no longer optimizing for appearance. They are no longer trying to maintain an identity that others already believe in. Instead, they begin operating in a space that is rarely available to those with early advantage. A space of low external pressure, but high internal demand. And that shift changes everything, because the absence of expectation removes one of the most common psychological constraints, the need to protect reputation. When there is nothing to protect, there is more freedom to build, more freedom to experiment, more freedom to fail without collapse, more freedom to observe without reacting. And this is where the underdog begins to develop something that is difficult to replicate in any other condition: unfiltered awareness. They start to notice patterns others ignore. They start to see behaviors more clearly. They begin to understand how people communicate, how decisions are made, how influence actually works, not in theory, but in real environments, not because they are trying to control others, but because they are trying to understand the system they are operating in. This distinction matters, because the ultimate underdog is not someone who forces outcomes. They are someone who studies reality closely enough to move within it effectively. And over time, this creates a psychological advantage that is not visible at first. While others rely on status, recognition, or early momentum, the underdog is building something quieter. They are building accuracy, accuracy in judgment, accuracy in timing, accuracy in self-assessment. And unlike confidence that is built on validation, this type of internal clarity is harder to destabilize, because it is not dependent on how others respond. It is anchored in what has been repeatedly observed, tested, and refined. But this process is not comfortable. It requires restraint, it requires patience, it requires the ability to tolerate being unseen without losing direction. And this is where most people break, not because they lack ability, but because they misinterpret silence as failure. They assume that if progress is not visible, it is not happening. They assume that if recognition is absent, value is absent. And slowly, they begin to abandon the very conditions that could have strengthened them. The ultimate underdog does the opposite. They stay, they observe longer, they refine more carefully, they detach from the need to be acknowledged too early, because they understand something that is not immediately obvious. Early visibility can sometimes interrupt deep development. When attention arrives too soon, it often pulls focus away from process and toward performance. And performance, when prioritized too early, tends to limit growth, because now the individual is no longer building. They are maintaining perception, maintaining status, maintaining expectation. The underdog, however, is not maintaining anything. They are constructing, quietly, deliberately, layer by layer. And because of this, their growth often goes unnoticed until it becomes undeniable. But even then, it does not look dramatic. It looks controlled, measured, precise. Because the transformation did not happen suddenly, it happened gradually, through consistent internal adjustment, through small decisions made correctly, repeatedly, without external validation. And this is where the psychology deepens, because over time, the underdog begins to shift their relationship with difficulty. Challenges are no longer interpreted as obstacles to identity. They are interpreted as feedback, information, signals that refine direction. Instead of reacting emotionally to every setback, they begin to ask more useful questions. What is this showing me? What can be adjusted? Where is the gap between intention and execution? This type of thinking does not remove difficulty, but it changes how difficulty is processed. And that changes behavior, because when difficulty is processed with clarity instead of resistance, it becomes usable. It becomes part of the system, not something to avoid, but something to integrate. And this is where a quiet form of resilience begins to form. Not loud resilience, not performative strength, but stable, repeatable, controlled resilience. The kind that does not need to prove itself. The kind that simply continues, even when progress is slow, even when outcomes are uncertain, even when recognition is delayed. And over time, this consistency begins to compound, skills improve, judgment sharpens, emotional responses stabilize, decisions become more deliberate, and perhaps most importantly, identity begins to shift, not based on what others say, but based on what has been consistently practiced. And this is the turning point, because once identity is grounded in behavior rather than perception, it becomes far less fragile, far less reactive, far less dependent on external conditions. And this is where the underdog starts to become difficult to ignore, not because they demand attention, but because their presence begins to carry weight. Their decisions begin to produce results, their communication becomes clearer, their actions become more aligned, and people start to notice. But by this point, something important has already changed. The underdog is no longer working for recognition. They are working from internal structure. And that distinction matters, because when recognition becomes the goal, behavior tends to fluctuate. When structure becomes the focus, behavior tends to stabilize. And stability, over time, creates trust. Not instant trust, not blind trust, but gradual, evidence-based trust. The kind that builds through consistent action, through measured responses, through reliability under pressure. And this is where the psychology of the ultimate underdog reaches its most powerful state. Not when they win, not when they are finally acknowledged, but when they no longer require those things to continue operating effectively, because at that point, their behavior is no longer reactive. It is intentional. It is not shaped by how they are perceived. It is shaped by how they think, how they evaluate, how they adjust. And this creates a level of independence that is difficult to disrupt, because it is not based on external conditions. It is based on internal discipline. And that discipline, once established, tends to persist, even when circumstances change, even when attention increases, even when expectations rise, because now the individual is not trying to become something. They are expressing something that has already been built, quietly, deliberately, over time. And this is why the ultimate underdog is often misunderstood. People see the outcome, but they miss the process. They see the moment, but they miss the years of controlled development that made that moment possible. They see confidence, but they do not see the repeated exposure to uncertainty that shaped it. They see clarity, but they do not see the long period of confusion that refined it. And because of this, they try to replicate the surface without understanding the structure beneath it. But the structure is where the real shift happens. It is where behavior becomes consistent, where thinking becomes more precise, where emotional reactions become more regulated, where actions begin to align with long-term direction rather than short-term validation. And this is not limited to a specific field. It applies across environments, because the core mechanism is psychological. It is about how a person interprets their position, how they respond to being underestimated, how they use or waste the space that comes with low expectation, because that space can either become a place of stagnation or a place of quiet construction. And the difference between those two outcomes is not talent. It is not luck. It is not timing. It is interpretation. And the behaviors that follow that interpretation. So the question is not whether someone starts as an underdog. Many people do. The question is what they do with that position. Do they resist it? Do they try to escape it too quickly? Do they internalize it as limitation? Or do they recognize the unique psychological conditions it creates and use those conditions to build something that is not easily shaken? Because when approached correctly, being underestimated is not a disadvantage. It is a phase that, if used with discipline and awareness, can produce a level of internal structure that is difficult to replicate any other way. And that is where the real shift begins. Not in how others see you, but in how you begin to see your position, not as something to overcome immediately, but as something to use deliberately, carefully, strategically, because the ultimate underdog is not defined by where they start. They are defined by how they build when no one is watching, and what they become long before anyone notices. But the hidden advantage of low expectation. There is a subtle shift that occurs when expectations are removed. It is not dramatic. It does not feel powerful in the beginning. In fact, for many people, it feels uncomfortable, almost like being invisible. But within that discomfort lies a psychological condition that, when used deliberately, can reshape how a person develops skill, judgment, and identity. Low expectation creates space. Not empty space, but usable space. Space where behavior is not constantly evaluated. Space where mistakes do not immediately define perception. Space where experimentation becomes less risky. And most people misunderstand this space. They see it as absence. Absence of recognition, absence of validation, absence of opportunity. But in many cases it is not absence, it is insulation. Because when external attention is low, internal processes can operate with less interference. There is less pressure to perform, less urgency to appear competent before competence is fully developed, less distraction from constant feedback, both positive and negative. And this changes how learning occurs, because learning at its most effective level requires a certain degree of privacy, not secrecy, but freedom from constant judgment. When every action is observed and evaluated, behavior tends to become defensive. People start protecting their image. They choose safer actions. They avoid visible mistakes. They optimize for how things look rather than how things work. And over time, this creates a gap between perceived ability and actual ability. The underdog, however, often operates outside of this dynamic. So they are not being closely observed. They are not being constantly evaluated, which means they can engage in a different kind of practice, a more honest kind. They can fail without immediate consequence. They can adjust without public scrutiny. They can test ideas that are not yet refined. And this allows for something important to develop: accuracy through repetition. Not performative repetition, not repetition designed to impress, but repetition designed to improve. This distinction matters because improvement requires confronting errors directly, not hiding them, not explaining them away, but seeing them clearly enough to make adjustments. And clarity is easier to achieve when there is less pressure to appear correct. So the underdog, if attentive, begins to develop a habit of internal feedback. They start noticing small inconsistencies in their behavior. They begin identifying patterns in their decisions. They recognize where effort is misaligned with outcome. And because they are not under constant external evaluation, they can take the time to refine these observations. They can slow down. They can think more carefully. They can choose not to react immediately. And this is where a different kind of intelligence begins to form. Not fast intelligence, not reactive intelligence, but deliberate intelligence, the kind that is built through reflection, through careful observation, through repeated adjustment. And while others may appear more confident in the moment, the underdog is building something more stable, something that does not rely on quick answers, something that improves over time. But this process requires discipline, because the absence of expectation can also lead to disengagement. If not managed properly, low attention can become a justification for low effort. It can create a sense of irrelevance, a belief that what one does not matter. And this is where many people lose the advantage. They misinterpret low expectation as a signal to withdraw, instead of seeing it as a condition to build. The ultimate underdog does not withdraw. They engage more intentionally. They recognize that while others may not be watching, their own standards still apply. And in many cases, those standards become stricter, not for display, but for development. Because when external validation is absent, internal structure must become stronger. Otherwise, behavior becomes inconsistent. Effort fluctuates. Progress stalls. So the underdog begins to rely less on external motivation and more on internal alignment. They define what matters. They clarify what they are working toward. They create their own benchmarks for improvement. And this is not about setting unrealistic goals. It is about creating measurable direction, clear enough to guide behavior, flexible enough to adjust when needed. And over time, this creates consistency. Not forced consistency, but natural consistency, because actions are no longer dependent on external triggers. They are driven by internal clarity. And this is where a deeper shift begins, because when behavior becomes self-directed, identity begins to stabilize, not based on how others respond, but based on what is repeatedly practiced. If a person consistently shows up, even without recognition, they begin to see themselves as reliable. If they consistently refine their work, even without feedback, they begin to see themselves as disciplined. If they consistently observe and adjust, they begin to see themselves as capable of improvement. And this self-perception is not inflated, it is earned. Through repeated action, through quiet effort, through consistent alignment between intention and behavior. And because it is earned, it tends to hold. Even when conditions change. Even when pressure increases, because it is not dependent on external confirmation. It is grounded in lived experience. But there is another layer to this advantage, a layer that is less obvious. When expectations are low, the cost of being underestimated is reduced, and this creates strategic flexibility. Because if others do not anticipate high performance, they are less likely to prepare for it. They are less likely to monitor it closely. They are less likely to react strongly to early signals. And this creates openings, not for manipulation, but for positioning. The underdog can develop skills without drawing attention too early. They can improve quietly. They can observe how systems operate without being seen as a threat. And this allows for a more accurate understanding of environments, because when attention is low, people tend to behave more naturally. They are less guarded, less performative, more consistent with their usual patterns. And this provides valuable information, not to exploit, but to understand, to navigate more effectively, to communicate with more precision, to make decisions that align with how things actually function, not how they appear on the surface. And over time, this understanding becomes an advantage. Because when the moment arrives, when visibility increases, when expectations shift, the underdog is not starting from zero. They are operating from accumulated insight, from practiced behavior, from refined judgment. And this allows them to respond more effectively under pressure, not because they are immune to it, but because they have already developed the structures needed to handle it, structures that were built in quieter conditions, when mistakes were less costly, when learning was less visible, when development could occur without constant interruption. And this is why the early phase of being an underdog is so critical. It is not just a starting point, and it is a developmental environment, one that, if used with intention, can produce long-term stability, but if neglected, can lead to stagnation. The difference lies in how the individual interprets the situation. Do they see low expectation as limitation or as space? Do they disengage, or do they refine? Do they wait for recognition, or do they build without it? Because over time, these choices compound, they shape behavior, they influence identity, they determine how a person responds when conditions change, and eventually conditions do change, opportunities emerge, visibility increases, expectations rise. And when that happens, the question is no longer whether someone is an underdog. The question becomes whether they are prepared. Prepared not just in skill, but in structure, in thinking, in emotional regulation, in consistency. Because when attention arrives, it tends to amplify what already exists. If behavior is inconsistent, it becomes more visible. If thinking is unclear, it becomes more exposed. If identity is fragile, it becomes more reactive, but if structure is strong, it becomes more reliable. If thinking is precise, it becomes more effective. If identity is stable, it becomes more resilient. And this is where the underdog who used their phase well begins to stand out, not because they suddenly changed, but because what they built quietly is now being seen, and it holds, it performs, it adapts, and this creates a shift in perception. Others begin to reassess, to adjust their expectations, to recognize what was not visible before. But by this point, the underdog is no longer dependent on that recognition, because their behavior was never built around it. It was built around internal clarity, around consistent action, around deliberate improvement. And that does not change simply because attention has increased. If anything, it becomes more important, because now there is more to manage, more input, more feedback, more potential distraction, and the ability to remain grounded becomes essential. So the advantage of low expectation is not just about the beginning. It is about what it allows a person to build before visibility arrives, and whether that foundation is strong enough to support what comes next. Because in many cases, success is not what challenges people, exposure is, and the underdog who has developed quietly is often better prepared for that exposure. Not because they sought it, but because they did not rely on it. They built first, they refined first, they stabilized first, and when the moment came, they were not trying to become ready. They already were, quietly, consistently, over time. Identity without validation. There is a point in the underdog's development where the external world becomes less useful as a mirror. Not because feedback stops entirely, not because recognition disappears completely, but because neither of those things is consistent enough to build a stable identity on. And this is where many people encounter a quiet psychological tension. They begin to notice that the signals they once relied on, approval, praise, visible progress, are not arriving in a predictable way. Some efforts go unnoticed, some improvements are not acknowledged, some results are delayed, and this creates a question beneath the surface. If no one is confirming your progress, how do you confirm it yourself? This is where identity begins to shift from external validation to internal verification. But that transition is not immediate. It requires a restructuring of how a person interprets effort, outcome, and self-worth. Because in early stages, most people are conditioned to associate improvement with visible response. You do something well, someone notices, you achieve something, it is recognized, you improve, it is reflected back to you, and over time this creates a feedback loop. Action leads to response. Response reinforces identity. Identity shapes future action. It is a system that can work, but only when feedback is consistent and accurate. The problem is that in many real-world environments, feedback is neither consistent nor accurate. Sometimes it is delayed, sometimes it is incomplete, sometimes it is influenced by factors unrelated to actual performance. And when a person relies too heavily on this system, their sense of progress becomes unstable. They begin to question themselves when recognition is absent. They begin to doubt improvement when feedback is unclear. They begin to adjust behavior based on perception rather than principle. And this leads to inconsistency, because now actions are no longer guided by internal standards. They are guided by fluctuating external signals. The underdog, however, is often forced out of this loop, not by choice at first, but by circumstance, because when recognition is limited, there is no reliable external mirror. And without that mirror, something else has to take its place. Internal evaluation. Not self-criticism, not harsh judgment, but structured self-assessment. The ability to observe one's own behavior with enough clarity to identify what is improving and what is not. And this is a skill. It is not automatic. It requires attention. It requires honesty. It requires the willingness to see gaps without exaggerating them, and to recognize progress without overstating it. And over time, as this skill develops, something begins to stabilize, a sense of identity that is not dependent on external response, because instead of asking, "Did others recognize this?" the individual begins asking, did this meet the standard I set? And that shift changes behavior. Because internal standards tend to be more consistent than external reactions. They can be adjusted deliberately, they can be clarified over time, they can be aligned with long-term direction, whereas external feedback often fluctuates. It varies across environments. It changes based on who is observing. It is influenced by context. So when identity is anchored internally, behavior becomes more stable, not rigid, but consistent, because it is guided by something that does not shift as frequently. And this consistency allows for deeper development, because now effort is not interrupted by constant recalibration based on external signals. The individual can stay focused longer, they can refine more precisely, they can continue improving even when feedback is minimal. But this process introduces another challenge. Without external validation, motivation must be sustained differently. It cannot rely on recognition. It cannot depend on praise. It must be supported by something more stable. Clarity of purpose, not a grand, abstract purpose, but a practical one. A clear understanding of why the effort matters, what it is building toward, how it connects to long-term direction. And this clarity does not need to be perfect. It does not need to answer every question, but it needs to be strong enough to guide behavior in the absence of external reinforcement. Because without that clarity, effort can feel disconnected. And when effort feels disconnected, consistency becomes difficult. So the underdog begins to develop a habit of linking action to purpose, not in a dramatic way, but in a practical way. They begin to see how small improvements contribute to larger outcomes, how repeated practice shapes capability, how consistency builds reliability. And this understanding reinforces effort, not because someone else is acknowledging it, but because it makes sense, because it aligns, because it moves something forward. And over time, this creates a different relationship with progress. Progress is no longer defined by visible milestones alone. It is also defined by internal markers, improved execution, clearer thinking, more controlled responses, better decision-making. And these markers, while less visible, are often more reliable indicators of development because they reflect actual change, not just perceived success. But this internal system must be managed carefully, because there is a risk of becoming either too lenient or too harsh. If standards are too low, growth slows. If standards are too rigid, motivation declines. So the underdog learns to calibrate, to adjust expectations based on context, to recognize when improvement is occurring, even if it is incremental, to acknowledge effort without overvaluing it, to maintain discipline without becoming overly critical. And this balance is not static. It evolves. It becomes more precise over time because it is informed by experience, by repeated cycles of action, observation, and adjustment. And as this system strengthens, identity becomes more grounded, not in outcomes alone, but in process, in how the individual approaches their work, in how they respond to challenges, in how consistently they align with their standards. And this creates a form of confidence that is different from surface-level assurance. It is quieter, less reactive, less dependent on immediate success, because it is built on repeated evidence. Evidence of showing up, evidence of adjusting, evidence of continuing, even when feedback is limited. And this confidence tends to be more stable, because it is not easily disrupted by a single outcome. A setback does not erase it. A lack of recognition does not weaken it significantly, because it is not based on those things. It is based on accumulated behavior. And this stability becomes increasingly important as the underdog progresses, because as visibility increases, external feedback returns. More opinions, more reactions, more evaluation. And without a stable internal system, this influx can become overwhelming. It can lead to overcorrection, to inconsistency, to a shift away from what was working. But when identity is internally anchored, external feedback becomes data, not definition. It can be considered, evaluated, integrated when useful, ignored when misaligned. And this allows the individual to remain steady, not resistant to input, but not controlled by it. And this is where the underdog begins to operate with greater clarity, because their behavior is not being pulled in multiple directions. It is guided by a consistent internal framework, one that has been built gradually, refined over time, tested through repeated action. And this framework supports better decisions, because decisions are no longer based on immediate reaction. They are based on alignment with standards, with purpose, with long-term direction. And this reduces unnecessary variation in behavior. It reduces impulsive shifts. It increases reliability. And over time, this reliability becomes visible, not instantly, but gradually, through consistent performance, through measured responses, through the ability to maintain direction even when conditions change. And this is where perception begins to shift. Others start to notice the stability, the consistency, the clarity, and they begin to associate that with capability. But again, this is not the primary goal. It is a byproduct, because the core development happened internally, in the absence of validation, in the absence of consistent feedback, in the space where identity had to be constructed deliberately. And that construction is what holds, even when conditions improve, even when recognition increases, even when expectations rise, because it was not built on those things, it was built without them. And that makes it more durable, more adaptable, more resistant to fluctuation. And this is a critical phase in the psychology of the ultimate underdog, because it determines whether success, when it arrives, will be sustainable, or whether it will destabilize behavior, because without internal grounding, external change can disrupt. But with it, external change becomes manageable. It becomes something to navigate, not something that dictates direction. And this is where the underdog moves into a different category, not defined by position, but by structure, by how they think, how they evaluate, how they maintain alignment over time. And that is what allows them to operate effectively, even when the environment begins to change. Controlled response under pressure. At a certain point, the environment begins to shift. The quiet phase does not last indefinitely. Visibility increases, expectations rise, attention becomes more frequent, more direct, more demanding. And with that shift comes pressure, not always extreme pressure, not always constant pressure, but enough to expose how a person responds when conditions are no longer neutral. This is where the underdog's earlier development is tested, because it is one thing to build in low-pressure conditions. It is another to maintain structure when variables increase, when timelines shorten, when decisions carry more weight, when outcomes are more visible. And this is where many individuals, regardless of where they started, begin to experience instability. Not because they lack ability, but because their response to pressure has not been trained. They have practiced execution, they have practiced skill, but they have not practiced regulation. And without regulation, pressure tends to distort behavior. It accelerates decisions without clarity. It narrows attention too quickly. It amplifies emotional reactions. And this creates inconsistency, because actions are no longer guided by structured thinking. They are guided by urgency. And urgency, while sometimes useful, often reduces accuracy when not managed carefully. The underdog who has used their earlier phase effectively approaches pressure differently, not by avoiding it, not by pretending it does not exist, but by learning how to respond within it. And that begins with recognition. Understanding that pressure does not just come from the situation, it also comes from interpretation, from how the situation is framed internally. Two individuals can face the same condition. One perceives it as threat, the other perceives it as challenge. The difference in perception influences behavior, not in a dramatic way at first, but in subtle adjustments, in how quickly they react, in how much they narrow their focus, in how they prioritize information. And over time, these differences accumulate, so the underdog begins to train perception, not by forcing positive thinking, but by adjusting interpretation. Instead of asking, "What if this goes wrong?" they begin asking, "What needs to be handled correctly here?" Instead of focusing on potential failure, they focus on required execution. This does not eliminate risk, it does not guarantee outcome, but it directs attention toward controllable elements. And this shift improves response, because attention is no longer scattered, it is focused, not rigidly, but deliberately. And this allows for better decision-making under pressure. But perception alone is not enough, because even with clear thinking, the body still responds to pressure. Heart rate increases, breathing becomes shallow, muscle tension rises, and these physiological changes influence behavior. They can accelerate reaction time, but they can also reduce precision, so the underdog learns to regulate. Not to eliminate these responses, but to manage them through awareness, through pacing, through deliberate control of input and output. They notice when their breathing changes, they slow it slightly, they recognize when their thoughts become rushed. They pause briefly before acting, they create small gaps between stimulus and response, and within those gaps they regain control. This is not about delaying action unnecessarily, it is about preventing automatic reaction from replacing intentional response. And this distinction is critical because under pressure, the default tendency is to react, to move quickly, to resolve tension as fast as possible. But fast resolution is not always effective resolution. Sometimes it leads to avoidable errors. So the underdog trains themselves to tolerate that moment of tension, that brief discomfort between recognizing a situation and responding to it. They do not rush to eliminate it. They use it to assess, to prioritize, to decide. And over time, this becomes more natural. The gap becomes more efficient. The pause becomes more precise. And behavior becomes more controlled, not slow, but deliberate. And this control creates consistency because actions are no longer driven by fluctuating emotional states. They are guided by structured thinking, even when pressure is present. And this is where a noticeable difference begins to emerge, because while others may react impulsively under pressure, the underdog maintains composure, not perfect composure, not complete emotional neutrality, but enough stability to continue operating effectively. And this stability is often interpreted as confidence, but it is not the same as surface-level confidence. It is not about appearing calm, it is about functioning clearly. And that clarity is built through repeated exposure, through encountering pressure in smaller forms, through practicing response in controlled conditions, through gradually increasing complexity. So when larger moments arrive, they are not entirely unfamiliar, they are extensions of what has already been experienced. And this reduces shock, it reduces overreaction, it allows the individual to remain within a functional range where thinking is still accessible, where decision-making is still possible, and where behavior can still align with intention. But this process requires preparation. It does not happen automatically, because if pressure is only encountered at high intensity, without prior exposure, it tends to overwhelm. So the underdog uses earlier phases to simulate pressure, not artificially, but by increasing standards, by setting tighter constraints, by practicing under conditions that require focus. And this builds tolerance gradually, without excess strain, without unnecessary stress, just enough to adapt, just enough to improve response. And over time, this creates a baseline, a level of stability that remains even when variables increase. And this baseline becomes a reference point, a place to return to when conditions fluctuate, when attention increases, when outcomes matter more. And this is where the underdog's development becomes visible, because under pressure, patterns are exposed, inconsistencies appear, gaps in preparation become clear, and those who have not developed regulation tend to show it. Their decisions become rushed, their communication becomes unclear, their actions become misaligned, not because they lack ability, but because pressure has altered their behavior. The underdog, however, maintains alignment, not perfectly, but consistently enough to continue performing, to continue adjusting, to continue progressing. And this creates trust, not immediate trust, but observable trust, because others begin to see that performance does not collapse under pressure, that decisions remain thoughtful, that responses remain measured. And this reliability becomes an advantage. Because in many environments, consistency under pressure is more valuable than occasional excellence without it. It is easier to work with, easier to predict, easier to build around. And over time, this shifts perception. The individual is no longer seen as inexperienced or uncertain. They are seen as stable, as capable of handling complexity, as someone who can be relied on when conditions are not ideal. But again, this is not the primary objective. It is a result of internal development, of practicing response, of refining regulation, of building the ability to operate within pressure rather than being controlled by it. And this ability extends beyond specific situations. It influences how the individual approaches challenges in general. They become less reactive, less driven by immediate discomfort, more focused on long-term alignment. And this changes how they engage with difficulty. Instead of avoiding it, they assess it. Instead of resisting it, they work through it, not in a forceful way, but in a structured way. And this creates momentum, not sudden momentum, but steady, sustainable progress, because behavior remains consistent, even when conditions fluctuate, and this consistency is what allows growth to continue, without major interruptions, without repeated resets, without cycles of intense effort followed by disengagement. It becomes a continuous process, measured, deliberate, adaptable. And this is where the psychology of the ultimate underdog reaches another level, because now it is not just about building in quiet conditions. It is about maintaining structure when those conditions change, when pressure increases, when attention rises, when outcomes matter more. And the ability to do that, consistently, deliberately, creates a foundation that is difficult to disrupt, because it is not dependent on ideal circumstances. And it is built to function within variation, within uncertainty, within pressure. And that is what makes it durable, what makes it transferable, what makes it applicable across environments, because the skill is not tied to a specific situation. It is tied to how the individual responds, and that response, once developed, tends to remain, even as the context evolves. Strategic, patience, and timing. There is a tendency, especially in competitive environments, to equate speed with progress, to assume that moving quickly is always beneficial, to believe that faster action leads to faster results. And in certain situations that is partially true, but speed without timing often leads to inefficiency. It creates movement without direction, effort without alignment, action without precision. The ultimate underdog learns to recognize this early, not because they reject action, but because they are often forced to operate without immediate advantage. They cannot rely on momentum. They cannot depend on early recognition. They cannot assume that quick visibility will support their progress. So they begin to develop something different, strategic patience, not passive waiting, not inactivity, but controlled pacing, the ability to move when movement is useful, and to hold position when it is not. And this requires a shift in how time is perceived, because most people measure progress through immediate outcomes. What happened today? What changed this week? What result was achieved quickly? The underdog begins to measure differently. They look at trajectory, direction over time, consistency across repeated cycles. They evaluate whether actions are moving them closer to alignment, even if results are not immediate. And this perspective reduces unnecessary urgency. It allows for more deliberate decision-making, because not every opportunity needs to be taken. Not every situation requires immediate response. Not every moment demands visible action. Some require observation, some require preparation, some require restraint. And restraint is often misunderstood. It is not hesitation due to fear. It is not avoidance of responsibility. It is the ability to delay action until it is more effective, to wait until information is clearer, until positioning is stronger, until execution can be more precise. And this restraint creates efficiency, because fewer actions are wasted, fewer decisions need to be reversed, fewer resources are spent on misaligned efforts. But developing this patience is not easy, because it goes against common instinct. When progress feels slow, the impulse is to accelerate, to do more, to act faster, to force movement. And sometimes that is appropriate, but often it leads to fragmentation, multiple actions taken without cohesion, energy spread across too many directions, and results that do not reflect the level of effort applied. The underdog learns to resist this pattern. They begin to ask a different question. Is this action aligned with long-term direction, or is it a reaction to short-term discomfort? This question creates space. Space to evaluate, space to prioritize, space to choose more carefully, and over time, this leads to better timing. Because actions are not just frequent, they are well placed, executed when conditions support them, when preparation has been completed, when the likelihood of effective outcome is higher. Again, not guaranteed, but improved. And this improves efficiency, because progress is not just about how much is done, it is about how effectively each action contributes to direction. But timing is not only about when to act, it is also about when to reveal. Because in many cases, premature visibility can disrupt development. If progress is exposed too early, it can attract attention before it is stable, before it is consistent, before it can withstand evaluation. And this can create pressure that interferes with refinement. So the underdog often develops in stages, quiet stages, where improvement is internal, where skills are refined without display, where thinking is clarified without external input. And then, when structure is stronger, visibility increases, not suddenly, but gradually, in a controlled way. And this approach reduces volatility, because what is being shown has already been tested, already been refined, already been stabilized, and this creates a different type of perception, not one based on initial excitement, but one based on consistent reliability. And reliability tends to hold longer, because it is not dependent on novelty. It is supported by repeated evidence, but this process requires discipline, because the temptation to reveal progress early is strong, to seek validation, to confirm that effort is working. And while occasional feedback is useful, constant exposure can dilute focus. It shifts attention from building to presenting, from refining to performing, and this can slow actual development. So the underdog learns to manage visibility, not to hide indefinitely, but to sequence it, to allow growth to reach a certain level of stability before increasing exposure. And this sequencing aligns with timing, because when visibility and capability are aligned, outcomes tend to be more consistent, more sustainable, more adaptable. But timing also applies to interaction, to communication, to decision-making within dynamic environments. Not every moment is equal. Some moments carry more weight. Some decisions have greater impact. And recognizing these moments requires awareness, the ability to observe patterns, to understand how systems behave over time, to identify when conditions are shifting. And this awareness is built through observation, through paying attention not just to outcomes but to processes, how people respond, how decisions are made, how change occurs. And over time, patterns begin to emerge, not perfectly, not predictively, but enough to inform better timing, enough to recognize when action is more likely to be effective and when it is better to wait. And this does not mean avoiding risk. It means choosing risk more carefully, engaging when alignment is stronger, when preparation is sufficient, when response capacity is developed. And this increases the likelihood of effective execution, not because the outcome is controlled, but because the variables are better understood. And this understanding reduces unnecessary error. It reduces avoidable setbacks. It creates smoother progression. But strategic patience also influences how setbacks are processed, because when a person is not rushing toward immediate results, a setback is less destabilizing. It is seen within a broader timeline, as part of the process, not as a final outcome. And this perspective supports resilience, not dramatic resilience, but steady resilience, the ability to continue without significant disruption, to adjust without losing direction, to refine without abandoning progress. And over time, this creates momentum, not rapid spikes, but sustained movement, forward, consistently. And this consistency becomes visible, because while others may fluctuate, moving quickly, then stopping, then restarting, the underdog continues, measured, deliberate, aligned. And this creates cumulative advantage, because small, consistent improvements compound. They build on each other, they reinforce structure, they strengthen capability, and eventually they reach a level where progress becomes more apparent, not sudden, but noticeable. And at that point, the perception begins to shift. What was once seen as slow becomes recognized as stable. What was once overlooked becomes acknowledged as reliable. And this changes how others interact. But again, this is not the primary objective. It is a result of consistent alignment between action and timing, between effort and direction, between visibility and readiness. And this alignment is what allows the underdog to move effectively within changing conditions because they are not reacting impulsively, they are responding deliberately, they are not chasing every opportunity, and they are selecting the ones that fit. They are not forcing outcomes, they are positioning themselves to act when it matters most. And this creates efficiency, not in how fast they move, but in how effectively each action contributes to progress. And over time, this efficiency becomes a defining characteristic because it reduces waste, it increases clarity, it supports sustainable growth, and it allows the individual to maintain direction, even when the environment becomes more complex. Adaptive thinking and continuous refinement. There is a moment in the underdog's progression where consistency alone is no longer sufficient. Up to this point, discipline, patience, and controlled response have created stability. They have allowed growth to take shape without unnecessary disruption. They have reduced noise, improved clarity, and built a foundation that holds. But once that foundation exists, a new requirement emerges: adaptation, because environments do not remain static. Conditions shift, expectations evolve, complexity increases, and what worked at one stage may not remain effective at the next. This is where many individuals encounter friction, not because they lack ability, but because they rely too heavily on previously successful patterns. They repeat what worked before, expecting similar outcomes, and sometimes, for a short period, that approach still produces results, but gradually, misalignment begins to appear. Small inefficiencies, delayed responses, decisions that no longer fit the context as precisely as they once did. And if these signals are ignored, performance begins to decline, not suddenly, but gradually. And this gradual decline is often difficult to detect without deliberate attention because it does not present as failure. It presents as reduced effectiveness. And reduced effectiveness is easy to overlook when there is still some level of progress. The ultimate underdog does not ignore these signals. They track them, not obsessively, but consistently. They pay attention to the relationship between action and outcome. They notice when effort produces less return, when decisions require more correction, when processes feel less efficient. And instead of pushing harder in the same direction, they pause, not to disengage, but to reassess, to ask a different set of questions. What has changed in the environment? What assumptions am I still operating on? Where is my current approach no longer aligned? And these questions introduce flexibility. They prevent rigidity. They allow the individual to adjust before inefficiency becomes a pattern. And this is where adaptive thinking begins to take shape. Not reactive thinking, not constant change, but structured adaptation. The ability to update behavior based on new information without abandoning core principles. And this distinction matters because adaptation without structure leads to inconsistency. Frequent changes without clear reasoning create instability, but structure without adaptation leads to stagnation. Rigid adherence to outdated patterns limits growth. So the underdog learns to balance, to maintain core direction while adjusting methods, to keep principles stable while refining execution. And this requires awareness at multiple levels: awareness of self, awareness of environment, awareness of interaction between the two, because adaptation is not only about changing external behavior, it is also about adjusting internal models. How situations are interpreted, how information is prioritized, how decisions are framed, and these internal models influence every action, often without conscious recognition. So the underdog begins to examine them, to question assumptions, not constantly, but periodically, to ensure that thinking remains aligned with reality, not with outdated perception. And this process strengthens accuracy, because decisions are based on current conditions, not past conditions, and this improves effectiveness. But adaptation also requires the ability to let go, to release methods that are no longer useful, even if they were effective before. And this can be difficult, because past success creates attachment. It reinforces certain behaviors. It builds confidence in specific approaches, and letting go of those approaches can feel like losing stability. But the underdog recognizes that stability does not come from repeating the same actions. It comes from maintaining alignment with what works now, and that alignment requires flexibility, the willingness to adjust without losing direction, to evolve without losing identity. And this is where internal structure becomes essential, because without it, adaptation can become scattered, inconsistent, driven by short-term signals rather than long-term clarity. But with structure, adaptation becomes targeted, intentional, aligned with overall progression, and this allows for continuous refinement. Not occasional improvement, but ongoing adjustment, small corrections made consistently over time. And these small corrections accumulate, they reduce error, they increase precision, they improve efficiency, and over time they create a level of performance that appears smooth, controlled, consistent. But beneath that appearance is constant adjustment, constant evaluation, constant refinement, not in a stressful way, but in a deliberate way. A structured process that becomes part of how the individual operates. And this process influences how feedback is used, because as the underdog progresses, feedback becomes more available, more detailed, more varied, and without a clear system, this feedback can become overwhelming. Conflicting opinions, different perspectives, multiple suggestions. And trying to integrate all of it can lead to confusion. So the underdog filters, not by rejecting input, but by evaluating it, based on alignment. Does this feedback match the direction I am moving toward? Does it reflect an accurate understanding of the situation? Is it supported by observable patterns? And this filtering allows useful feedback to be integrated, while less relevant input is set aside, not dismissed entirely, but not allowed to disrupt direction. And this maintains clarity, because adaptation is guided, not random. It is informed, not reactive, and this improves decision-making, because each adjustment is connected to a broader structure, a system that has been built over time, refined through experience, and tested across different conditions. But continuous refinement also requires patience, because not every adjustment produces immediate results. Some changes take time to show effect, some improvements are subtle, and this can create uncertainty, a question of whether the adjustment is working or whether further change is needed. And this is where the underdog relies on process, on consistent evaluation over time, not immediate reaction. They observe patterns across multiple cycles. They look for trends rather than isolated outcomes. And this reduces overcorrection. It prevents unnecessary changes. It allows for more accurate assessment. And this accuracy strengthens confidence, not surface confidence, but confidence in judgment, in the ability to assess situations effectively, to make adjustments when needed, to maintain direction even when outcomes are not immediately clear. And this confidence supports continued refinement because it reduces hesitation. It allows the individual to act with clarity, to adjust with purpose, to continue improving without constant doubt. And over time, this creates adaptability as a stable trait, not something that appears only in certain situations, but something that is integrated into behavior, a default approach to change. And this is what allows the underdog to remain effective across environments, because they are not dependent on a single set of conditions. They are able to adjust, to recalibrate, to realign without losing structure. And this makes their performance more durable, more transferable, more resilient to variation, because it is not fixed. It evolves continuously, deliberately, and this evolution is what sustains progress. Because without it, growth eventually plateaus. With it, development continues, even as complexity increases, even as challenges become more nuanced, even as expectations rise. And this is where the psychology of the ultimate underdog becomes fully dynamic, not just stable, but responsive, not just consistent, but adaptable, not just disciplined, but refined. And this combination creates a level of capability that is difficult to disrupt because it is not dependent on static conditions. It is built to operate within change, to learn from it, to adjust to it, to use it as part of the process. And that is what allows progress to continue without unnecessary interruption. Quiet authority and evidence-based trust. There is a stage in the underdog's development where effort becomes less visible, but impact becomes more consistent. It does not arrive with a clear announcement. It does not feel like a dramatic transformation. It feels steady. Decisions become cleaner. Responses become more measured. Actions align more closely with intention. And over time, this consistency begins to shape how others perceive the individual, not through claims, not through self-promotion, but through repeated evidence. Because in most environments, perception adjusts based on patterns, not isolated moments, not single outcomes, but consistent behavior observed across time. And this is where the underdog begins to establish something that is often misunderstood: quiet authority. Not authority based on position, not authority granted by title, but authority that emerges from reliability, from the ability to produce aligned outcomes repeatedly, from the capacity to remain composed when conditions fluctuate, from the consistency of thinking, communication, and execution. And this form of authority is different. It does not demand attention, it attracts it gradually, because people begin to notice patterns. They observe how decisions are made, they see how challenges are handled, they recognize that responses are not impulsive, that actions are not random, that there is structure beneath behavior. And this recognition builds trust, not immediate trust, not blind trust, but evidence-based trust, the kind that develops through observation, through repeated confirmation that behavior aligns with expectation. And this type of trust is more stable because it is not built on impression. It is built on experience. But this stage introduces a new dynamic, because as trust increases, so does responsibility. Others begin to rely more, expect more, observe more closely. And this creates a different kind of pressure, not the uncertainty of being overlooked, but the responsibility of being depended on. And this requires adjustment, because maintaining consistency under increased expectation requires continued discipline. It requires maintaining the same internal structure that was built earlier, without becoming rigid, without becoming reactive to increased attention. And this is where many individuals shift unintentionally. They begin to perform for expectation. They adjust behavior to meet perception. They try to maintain the image that has formed, and in doing so, they lose alignment. Because now actions are influenced by how they are seen, not by what is effective. And this creates subtle instability, small deviations in decision-making, in communication, in focus. And over time, these deviations can reduce effectiveness. So the underdog, now operating with greater visibility, must return to internal alignment, to the same principles that guided earlier development: clear thinking, measured response, and deliberate action, not to resist expectation, but to ensure that behavior remains grounded, because expectation is external, alignment is internal, and sustainable performance depends on internal consistency, not external perception. So the individual continues to evaluate, to observe their own behavior, to ensure that decisions are still based on structure, not on pressure to maintain image. And this requires awareness, because the shift can be subtle. It does not feel like a major change. It feels like a small adjustment, a slight increase in urgency, a slight concern about how actions are interpreted. And if left unchecked, these small shifts accumulate. They influence behavior gradually. So the underdog maintains a practice of recalibration, not constant self-correction, but periodic reflection. Asking, is my behavior still aligned with what is effective? Am I responding to the situation or to the perception of the situation? Is my decision-making process still clear? These questions help maintain structure. They prevent drift. They ensure that increased visibility does not distort internal systems. And this allows performance to remain consistent, not because conditions are stable, but because the response is stable. And this stability reinforces trust, because others begin to see that behavior does not fluctuate with attention. That performance remains aligned even when expectations rise, and this creates confidence in interaction. People begin to rely on the individual's judgment, to seek input, to consider their perspective, not because it is imposed, but because it has proven reliable. And this is where quiet authority becomes more defined, not through assertion, but through influence. Influence that emerges from clarity, from consistency, from the ability to communicate effectively, not forcefully, but precisely, because communication at this stage becomes more important, not just what is done, but how it is conveyed, because as responsibility increases, decisions often involve others. They require coordination, alignment across different perspectives. And this requires the ability to explain reasoning, to articulate decisions clearly, to ensure that others understand not just the action, but the intent behind it. And this communication must be structured, not overly complex, not overly simplified, clear enough to guide action, flexible enough to allow input. And this balance supports collaboration. It allows others to engage effectively, to contribute without confusion, to align without unnecessary friction. And this strengthens overall outcomes because decisions are not isolated, they are integrated within a broader system, and the ability to operate within that system increases effectiveness. But this stage also requires restraint, because with increased influence comes the ability to shape outcomes more directly. And how that influence is used matters, not for control, but for alignment. The underdog does not use influence to dominate, they use it to clarify direction, to improve understanding, to support better decisions across the system. And this reinforces trust, because influence is applied responsibly, not excessively, not unnecessarily. And this maintains balance, because the goal is not to control every outcome, it is to contribute effectively, to improve the overall process, to ensure that decisions are made with clarity and alignment. And this approach sustains long-term effectiveness, because it does not create resistance. It does not rely on authority alone. It builds cooperation based on trust, based on consistency, based on clear communication. And over time, this creates a stable position, not fixed, but respected, not dominant, but influential, because it is supported by evidence, repeated behavior, consistent alignment. And this is where the underdog's journey reaches a mature stage, not defined by overcoming, not defined by proving others wrong, but defined by operating with clarity, with consistency, with responsibility. And this maturity is not static. It continues to evolve, because environments continue to change, challenges continue to emerge, and the same principles apply: observation, adjustment, alignment, consistency. But now they are applied at a higher level, with more complexity, with more variables, with greater responsibility. And this is where the underdog is no longer identified by their starting position. They are identified by how they operate, how they think, how they respond, how they contribute. And that identity is not easily altered, because it is built on repeated evidence, not on perception, not on temporary success, but on sustained behavior. And this is what allows it to hold even when conditions shift, even when expectations change, even when new challenges arise, because the foundation remains the same: structured, deliberate, aligned. And that is what creates quiet authority, not something that needs to be declared, but something that becomes evident over time. The underdog who no longer needs the title. There is a final shift that often goes unnoticed. It does not happen at a specific moment. There is no clear line where one phase ends and another begins. But over time, something changes in how the individual relates to the idea of being an underdog. At the beginning, the label carries weight. It feels like a position, a limitation, a condition that needs to be overcome. It shapes perception, how situations are interpreted, how others are viewed, how effort is directed. In some cases, it creates motivation, a desire to improve, to close gaps, to reach a level where the label no longer applies. But as development progresses, the label begins to lose relevance, not because the individual has achieved a specific status, not because they are now consistently recognized, but because their behavior is no longer organized around that identity. They are not acting in response to being underestimated. When they are not adjusting behavior to prove something, they are operating from structure, from clarity, from a system that has been built over time, and within that system the label becomes unnecessary, because the work is no longer reactive, it is not driven by comparison, it is not shaped by external positioning, it is guided by internal alignment. And this is where the psychology reaches its most stable form, not defined by opposition, not defined by resistance, but defined by direction, clear, consistent direction, the same direction that was built quietly, refined gradually, stabilized through repetition. And this direction does not depend on how others see it. It does not require constant validation. It does not shift With perception, it remains, even when attention increases, even when expectations change, even when the environment becomes more complex, because it is not anchored externally, it is anchored internally. And this internal anchoring changes how the individual moves forward. They are no longer trying to catch up. They are no longer trying to close a perceived gap. They are focused on maintaining alignment, on continuing the process, on refining what already exists. And this creates a different kind of momentum, not driven by urgency, not driven by pressure to prove, but driven by consistency, by repeated, aligned action. And this momentum is sustainable because it does not rely on emotional spikes. It does not depend on temporary motivation. It is supported by structure, by habits, by thinking patterns that have been reinforced over time. And within this state, the individual becomes less reactive to external conditions. Recognition does not significantly alter behavior. Lack of recognition does not disrupt it. Feedback is considered, but not allowed to redefine direction without evaluation. And this creates stability, not rigidity, but stability. The ability to continue operating effectively across different conditions, without major fluctuation, without repeated resets. And this is where the earlier phases reveal their full value. The quiet development, the internal verification, the controlled response, the strategic patience, the continuous refinement. All of it contributes to this point, where behavior is consistent, thinking is clear, and direction is maintained without constant adjustment. But this is not an endpoint, it is a continuation. Because development does not stop, conditions continue to change, new challenges emerge, different environments introduce new variables, and the same principles must be applied again. Observation, adjustment, alignment, consistency. But now they are applied with more awareness, with more experience, with more precision. And this increases effectiveness because each cycle builds on the previous one. Each adjustment becomes more accurate, each decision becomes more informed. And this creates ongoing improvement, not dramatic leaps, but steady progression. And this progression is not always visible. It does not always produce immediate external results, but it strengthens internal structure. It refines capability. It enhances judgment. And over time, these changes accumulate. They shape how the individual operates, across contexts, across challenges, across stages. And this is what makes the development durable, because it is not tied to a single achievement. It is not dependent on a specific environment. It is transferable, applicable across different situations, because it is rooted in how the individual thinks and acts, not in what they have achieved. And this creates independence, not isolation, but independence in function, the ability to operate effectively without relying on constant external input, without needing continuous reinforcement, without being destabilized by changing conditions. And this independence supports responsibility, because now decisions carry more weight, actions influence broader outcomes, and the ability to maintain alignment becomes more important. Not just for personal development, but for the systems the individual is part of. And this requires continued discipline, not intense discipline, but consistent discipline, the same type that was built in earlier stages, applied again at a higher level, with more awareness. And this is where the cycle continues, because the principles do not change, only the context does, and the individual, having developed the ability to adapt, continues to refine, continues to adjust, continues to operate with clarity, without needing to return to earlier patterns of reaction, without needing to rely on external labels, because the identity has already shifted from position to process, from label to behavior, from perception to structure. And within that structure, there is stability, there is clarity, there is direction. Not perfect, not fixed, but consistent enough to guide action. And that is what remains. Long after the label of underdog has faded, long after initial perceptions have changed, long after recognition has increased or decreased, what remains is how the individual operates, how they think, how they respond, how they continue to refine. And this is what defines the outcome, not the starting point, not the label, but the process that was built. and maintained, quietly, deliberately, over time. And that process does not need to be announced. It does not need to be defended. It becomes evident through action, through consistency, through the ability to operate with clarity across changing conditions. And this is where the underdog, without needing the title, continues forward. Not as someone who overcame, but as someone who learned how to build, how to adjust, how to maintain alignment, and how to continue without interruption.